Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're slicing through the superfood hype surrounding, well, one of the most delicious yet perhaps most botanically complex members of the berry family, the raspberry.
That's right.
And for the listener who sent us this deep stack of research, we're not just talking about the common red breakfast berry, Rubus idaeus, but also its darker, often more concentrated cousin, Rubus occidentalis, the black raspberry.
And our mission today is really laser-focused. The sources you provided are exhaustive. I mean, they span everything from randomized controlled trials, RCTs, to systematic reviews and meta-analyses.
And the claims are they're vast. Everything from better blood sugar control and, enhanced vascular repair to, frankly, some very ambitious claims about longevity and disease reversal.
Very ambitious.
So the big question we're tackling is, I think, pretty straightforward. Are raspberries a genuine superfood backed by rigorous gold standard human clinical evidence? Or are they just a very healthy, very expensive, and very well-marketed snack?
And that's the key. We are going straight to the data that truly matters. What do those human clinical trials tell us that we can actually rely on? And what kind of certainty do we have in those results?
Exactly. We have to be scientific and rigorous here.
We do.
Oh.
We are setting aside the cell culture studies, the animal models for now, which, often show these spectacular results, and we're demanding human proof.
Right. And when we talk about human proof, we need to understand the molecular foundation first.
We do.
So to give everyone an initial snapshot of why researchers are so, obsessed with these berries, we should probably highlight the core compounds the research consistently focuses on. Because it's not just one thing, is it?
Not at all. It's a whole symphony of bioactive molecules. The first group, which gets all the credit because, of its visual impact, is the anthocyanins.
The colors.
The colors. These are the pigments molecules like cyanogen and pelargonidin that give raspberries their deep red or purple hue. They are classic polyphenols, and they're recognized for their antioxidant capacity. But here's the narrative twist right away. They are beautiful, they are potent, but as we'll reveal later in this dive, they are often let's say, the false heroes of the systemic health story.
Ooh, that sounds like a major spoiler, but I'll hold the question for now.
Mm-hmm.
And the second key component, which you've highlighted as really central to the long-term story, is the elagitannins.
Correct. The elagitannins are large, complex, often colorless molecules. And they're incredibly important, not for what they are when you swallow them, but for what they become inside your body hours later.
So they're precursor molecules.
They're the precursor molecules to the most exciting systemic metabolic benefits that researchers are currently tracking.
Yes. So we have the visible, flashy anthocyanins, and then the invisible, hardworking elagitannins.
Exactly. And beyond those powerful polyphenols, we can't forget the basic nutritional components that contribute regardless of the hype. Raspberries pack up to 6.5 grams of fiber per 100 grams.
Which is substantial for a fruit. It's very substantial. It's more than many common whole grains. And they provide a solid dose of vitamin C, about 26.2 milligrams per 100 grams. And this high fiber content, by the way, is a vital clue in the metabolic story, as we will see.
Okay, so we have the ingredients list. Now, what's the scientific verdict on all the hype? Can we draw strong conclusions from this?
Well, when we apply the grade certainty framework, which assesses the quality of the evidence, looking at factors like trial size, consistency, risk of bias, we find that most of the data on raspberries falls into the low to moderate certainty categories.
And that's pretty typical for nutrition science, right?
It is, yeah. The trials are often small. They're short-term, 4 to 12 weeks, or the results are what we call heterogeneous, meaning they don't apply universally to everyone.
So no dramatic universal claims right out of the gate, especially not for the general, healthy population. Absolutely not. And we can immediately state the first critical takeaway. Forget the longevity claims right now. That evidence is classified as very low or essentially non-existent in humans. There are no human RCTs testing raspberries for lifespan or all-cause mortality.
Right.
The real evidence-based applications we can discuss are focused entirely on short-term, acute effects in specific, often metabolically challenged populations.
That is a vital distinction. So we are dealing with targeted functional effects, not a magic anti-aging pill.
That's the key. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the strength of the evidence allows us to transition directly to where the data is strongest and most consistent.
Which is immediate post-meal management.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. The most convincing, most consistent, and I think most actionable story raspberries tell in the clinical literature is about post-meal blood sugar control, what researchers call acute glycemia. and the resulting insulin response.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just a minor benefit. For millions dealing with metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetes, this is a major intervention.
It is. These effects are documented primarily in rigorous randomized crossover trials using common frozen red raspberries, so Rubus idaeus, and this is where we find the most reliable, moderate certainty evidence.
And what's crucial here, you said, is that the benefit is cohort-specific.
Very cohort-specific. The strongest positive effect is demonstrated in adults with prediabetes and insulin resistance. We call that the pre-DMIR population, or those with existing type 2 diabetes.
Okay, let's pause on that point. Why is the benefit strongest in that pre-DMIR group? Why do healthy controls see minimal change?
Well, think about it physiologically. If you have a well-tuned metabolism, your body handles a glucose spike efficiently already. The benefit of the raspberries is marginal at best. But if you are insulin resistant,
Meaning your cells just don't respond well to insulin signals.
precisely, you often experience a dramatic and prolonged spike in both blood sugar and insulin after eating carbohydrates. The raspberries act as a brake on that uncontrolled surge.
So the healthy controls in these trials, they see minimal, if any, clinically relevant change because their system is already running optimally.
Exactly. This specificity means the food is acting functionally, almost like a mild pharmaceutical intervention targeting a known metabolic weakness.
Okay, so give us the details on one of the key randomized crossover trials that established this benefit.
Certainly. One pivotal RCT involved 32 overweight and obese adults, and 21 of them specifically fell into that high-risk category of prediabetes and insulin resistance. They consumed an identical, standardized, high-carbohydrate meal on 3 separate occasions.
So one control meal with no raspberries.
Right. Then the same meal with 125 grams, that's about 1 cup of frozen red raspberries. And finally, the meal with 250 grams, so about 2 cups.
And that's a practical, real-world dose. A cup of raspberries is manageable. What exactly happened in the 2 or 4 hours after they ate?
The results were striking, particularly for that pre-DMIR group. Consuming raspberries with the meal significantly blunted the metabolic spike. We need to look at 2 key metrics here: glucose and insulin. Both the 125-gram and the 250-gram doses significantly reduced the 2-hour insulin area under the curve, or AUC.
Okay, let's explain AUC simply for the listener. What does that actually mean?
Right, good question. So, think of the AUC as the total amount of work your pancreas has to do. When you eat, your insulin spikes, and the AUC is the total area under that curve for a given period, usually 2 hours.
So a reduced AUC means your body didn't have to secrete as much total insulin to handle the glucose load.
Exactly. It reduced the overall metabolic stress. The body didn't have to work as hard to clear the glucose. It was a less stressful event.
And what about the glucose itself?
The effects there were also clear. When they looked at the glucose curve, the higher dose, the 250-gram dose, significantly reduced both the 2-hour glucose AUC and the peak glucose concentrations compared to the control meal.
So it flattened the curve.
It dramatically improved the overall postprandial glycemic burden. It effectively flattened the curve, yes.
And for those with established type 2 diabetes, do similar trials confirm this?
They do. For those with T2DM, similar trials found that 250 grams of frozen red raspberries reduced serum glucose concentrations 2 and 4 hours postprandially by a clinically relevant 10 to 15%.
Wow.
And along with that, measurable reductions in acute inflammatory markers that surge after a high-carb meal.
So the implication here, mechanistically, is that the polyphenols, the allagitannins and anthocyanins, are physically interfering with the immediate digestive process. How do they do that?
Well, that's the key hypothesis, and the data supports it. The mechanisms include the polyphenols physically inhibiting intestinal enzymes like alpha-glucosidase.
And alpha-glucosidase is what breaks down complex sugars into simple, absorbable glucose.
Right. So if the raspberry compounds block this enzyme, the carbohydrates are digested slower, which delays the glucose absorption into the bloodstream.
It's like putting speed bumps in the small intestine's digestive pathway.
That is an excellent analogy, yes. And there is also the possibility of improved peripheral tissue insulin action, meaning the cells that utilize glucose respond better to the insulin that is produced.
This brings us to a critical distinction you made earlier. Is this a short-term, instant fix like a seatbelt? Or does eating raspberries daily fix the underlying metabolic engine?
And this is the critical distinction. This is an acute effect. The primary benefit occurs immediately after consumption, specifically in that 2 to 4 hour post-meal window.
So if you skip the raspberries with your high-carb meal, you lose that immediate glycemic blunting effect.
You do, Which is important because when researchers looked at the chronic consumption trials, the picture changed.
How so?
One RCT involving overweight adults at risk of metabolic syndrome had participants consume 280 grams of frozen red raspberries per day for 8 weeks. They found no large, statistically significant changes in fasting markers.
So the conventional things a doctor might test for, like HbA1c, fasting glucose, standard fasting lipids.
Right, none of those showed a major shift.
So if I eat a cup of raspberries every day for 2 months, but I eat them as a snack in the morning and my main high-carb meal is in the evening, I might miss that primary benefit of flattening that evening glucose spike.
Precisely. If you're hoping for a change in your long-term fasting glucose, or HbA1c, raspberries alone, over a short duration, are unlikely to deliver that a dramatic result, especially in a healthy or even mildly overweight cohort.
So the strength of the evidence is clearly in managing the immediate glycemic burden of a specific meal.
The dose and timing are incredibly practical and tactical.
Right. The 125 to 250 grams, 1 to 2 cups, consumed with a carbohydrate-rich meal.
That's the effective timing and dose shown in these high-quality trials. Taking that same dose as an isolated snack 3 hours later may not yield the same powerful effect because the timing relative to the carbohydrate load is wrong.
Wait, before we leave this, you mentioned those chronic trials showed no change in fasting markers. But did the omics data, the advanced molecular analysis, reveal anything interesting? Something suggesting a slower underlying change might still be happening?
That's where the nuance truly lies and why we can't dismiss the chronic benefit entirely. Even without major changes in conventional fasting markers in that cohort, the 8-week RCT did find significant modulation of immune metabolic gene expression and changes in metabolites.
Okay, so what kind of subtle shifts were they tracking? Sounds like we're getting into the weeds here.
We are, but it's important. The metabolomics suggested subtle anti-inflammatory and metabolic shifts were occurring beneath the surface. For instance, researchers saw a decrease in certain triglyceride species, which can signal improved lipid handling, and an increase in metabolites like beta-alanine.
Beta-alanine. Isn't that involved in muscle function?
It is muscle function and nerve signaling. They also saw pathways related to immune cell trafficking and cytotoxicity regulation were downregulated.
So even if my fasting glucose didn't drop, my body's internal machinery was, what, less stressed and less inflamed after 8 weeks of daily consumption?
That's the interpretation. It suggests that even in cohorts that aren't sick enough to see major swings in fasting markers, the raspberries are exerting subtle, systemic, anti-inflammatory and phospholipid metabolism effects at the molecular level.
But this is still low to moderate certainty evidence.
It is, but it provides strong mechanistic support that daily consumption is beneficial for general housekeeping, even if it doesn't dramatically change your blood test results in 2 months.
So the immediate protective value is clear. 1 to 2 cups with your highest carb meal. But there's also a low certainty underlying corrective potential for chronic inflammation over time.
Exactly. We have both acute protection and subtle chronic support.
Okay. Moving past blood sugar, let's look at the plumbing, the cardiovascular system. Here's where it gets really interesting, because the story shifts a bit between the common red raspberries and their darker, more concentrated cousins, the black raspberries.
It does. But before we get to the nuanced positive benefits, we must maintain scientific realism. When researchers pooled data from systematic reviews and meta-analyses, the overall result for the general population was, well, a statistical shrug.
Meaning they don't solve generalized heart disease.
Right. The meta-analyses consistently show no significant overall effects on broad markers in the general population. We're talking common clinical metrics like blood pressure, total cholesterol, LDL-C, or HDL-C.
So we can't tell the listener that eating raspberries will make them lose 5 pounds or drop their blood pressure universally.
Not based on the pooled generalized data, no. Likewise, meta-analyses consistently report no significant overall effects on weight, BMI, or waist circumference over short time periods. However, and this is crucial, there are subgroup exceptions.
Okay, so which groups did benefit?
Individuals with existing metabolic issues or higher baseline risk showed detectable changes. For example, LDL and total cholesterol decreased significantly in individuals with elevated baseline total. Total cholesterol, so greater than 200 milligrams per deciliter, and especially in those with metabolic syndrome or participants over 35 years old.
So if your lipids are already optimal, you probably won't see much change. But if you're carrying some cardiovascular or metabolic risk, the benefit might be detectable in your cholesterol numbers.
Precisely. Furthermore, they noted that HDL-C, the good cholesterol, sometimes increased, particularly in females, obese individuals, or, interestingly, in healthy participants under 35.
So it's very population specific.
It underscores that nutrition science is rarely one size fits all.
Now let's talk about the black raspberry difference. These seem to be the powerhouses in vascular studies. Why is that?
Yes, we have to introduce the black raspberry Rubus occidentalis as the powerhouse for these vascular and also chemoprevention studies. They are typically used in trials in freeze-dried extract or powder form, primarily because they contain up to 3 times higher anthocyanin content than red varieties.
3 times. So that's a much more concentrated dose.
A highly concentrated delivery of compounds, which is necessary to achieve a therapeutic dose systemically.
And what does that concentration do for the health of the arteries, specifically the lining?
It seems to specifically target the endothelium, that delicate inner lining of your blood vessels. And to measure this, researchers use something called flow-mediated dilation, or FMD.
Okay, let's use an analogy for FMD because it's a standard term but can be confusing.
Right. Think of FMD as testing the flexibility and responsiveness of your artery walls. It measures how well your arteries relax and dilate when they need more blood flow. Poor endothelial function, so poor FMD, is a very early or very strong predictor of future cardiovascular risk.
It's like seeing how quickly a rubber hose snaps back after being squeezed.
That's a great way to think about it.
So we want high efficient FMD. What did the trials show?
A double-blind, randomized crossover trial in healthy young males used fresh red raspberries and showed a small but physiologically relevant improvement. Consuming 200 to 400 grams improved FMD acutely, showing an increase of 1 to 1.6% at 2 hours post-consumption.
1 to 1.5% still sounds pretty minimal.
It sounds small, but that small percentage is physiologically and statistically relevant. Epidemiological evidence suggests that each 1% increase in FMD correlates with approximately a 4% reduction in the risk of future cardiovascular events.
Wow, okay, so a small acute bump is a clinically meaningful signal.
It is. And importantly, this improvement persisted to 24 hours in some intervention groups, suggesting a lasting beneficial effect from a single high dose.
And that's the immediate acute effect on vessel flexibility.
Yeah.
What about chronic vascular remodeling? This is where those potent black raspberry extracts come in, right?
This is where the black raspberry really shines, showing evidence of actual repair. A 12-week RCT in patients with metabolic syndrome used black raspberry extract and showed 2 significant long-term structural changes. First, they saw significant improvements in arterial stiffness.
So the large arteries becoming more elastic and less rigid.
Exactly. It's a good measure of overall vascular aging. But the second result is arguably more profound from a repair perspective. They found increased circulating endothelial progenitor cells, or EPCs.
Endothelial progenitor cells. What are these and why are they so crucial?
ETCs are essentially the stem cells of your blood vessel lining. When your endothelium gets damaged by high blood pressure, inflammation, high glucose EPCs are dispatched from the bone marrow to patrol the circulation and repair the damage. They are crucial for vascular maintenance and regeneration.
So an increase in circulating EPCs suggests the black raspberry extract is actively stimulating the body's internal repair system for its vascular network.
Exactly. It suggests the body is enhancing its capacity for vascular maintenance, a very promising mechanism directly linked to reduced long-term cardiovascular risk.
And connecting this back to those subtle metabolic shifts, these vascular effects are also consistently supported by a reduction in generalized inflammatory markers.
They are. Across multiple trials involving high-risk populations, overweight, obese, diabetic raspberry consumption consistently reduced circulating inflammatory markers. We see reductions in C-reactive protein, CRP, and key cytokines like interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha.
It sounds like the berry is acting as a natural anti-inflammatory dampener on the entire system.
That's a great way to put it. The mechanistic link here is that the polyphenols are known to modulate fundamental inflammatory signaling pathways. The most well-known is the NF-kappa B pathway.
Okay, for the listener who doesn't work in a molecular biology lab, what's the simplest way to think about how NF-kappa B is reduced?
Right, so NF-kappa B is essentially the master switch for inflammation in nearly every cell. When the body encounters stress, like a high-fat meal, NF-kappa B is turned on, telling the cells to churn out pro-inflammatory cytokines. The raspberry compounds appear to inhibit the activation of this switch.
They're turning down the volume on the body's inflammatory speaker.
Exactly, reducing the production of those damaging cytokines. And we also see NRF2 signaling mentioned.
Right. What is that?
NRF2 is often called the master regulator of cellular defense. It activates genes that produce antioxidant and detoxifying enzymes. So raspberries are performing a dual function, turning down the pro-inflammatory NF-kappa B and turning up the protective NRF2 pathway.
That's a powerful 1-2 punch.
It provides a powerful, multi-pronged anti-inflammatory effect that helps explain the improvements in both glucose handling and vascular function.
And the black raspberry seems consistently linked to stronger, more potent effects, reinforcing that if you're seeking vascular or localized therapeutic benefits, the concentrated black variety is the one chosen by researchers.
The higher phenolic content in R. occidentalis is likely the reason it's so frequently chosen for trials targeting localized effects or high-concentration systemic delivery. It gives researchers the highest possible density of active ingredients in a practical dose.
Okay, this is the narrative turning point of the deep dive. The listener needs to know why the benefits are so specific, why we saw that FMD improvement persist for 24 hours, and why the timing matters so much for the acute effect. If you eat a cup of raspberries, where do the active compounds actually go?
This is the aha moment of polyphenol metabolism, and it completely changes how you view these berries. The conventional wisdom is that the colorful stuff, the anthocyanins, must be absorbed to provide a benefit, but the reality is that bioavailability shock we hinted at, the colorful anthocyanins have very low bioavailability in the plasma.
How low again?
Very low. Less than 1% of the intact anthocyanins reach systemic circulation in their original colorful form. They were transient, they degrade rapidly, and most of them just travel the length of the GI tract.
So the color is misleading. The immediate anti-inflammatory and systemic antioxidant effect isn't coming primarily from the color, but from a longer, more complex process further down the gut.
Precisely. Here's where the elagitannins step in and become the true systemic stars of the show. Since they are large, complex molecules, polymers, they are too large to be absorbed whole in the small intestine. They need help.
So what's the metabolism pathway for them? It sounds like a complex process just to get them into the bloodstream.
It is a three-stage conversion, a true biological relay race. First, they reach the proximal GI tract, where they are hydrolyzed into an intermediate molecule called ellagic acid. But even ellagic acid has limited solubility and absorption.
This is still stuck, needing a further transformation.
Correct. The final, most crucial step, the one that determines if you get a sustained systemic benefit hours later, is that the ellagic acid must be converted by specific colon gut microbes into highly bioactive small molecule metabolites called urolithins.
Ah, so this is where your microbiome acts as a chemical conversion factory.
It is. Think of the small intestine as the first checkpoint. It screens out the large elagitannins. They reach the colon, and the bacteria there act like a specialized refinery, breaking the complex molecule down into the simple, highly effective transport vehicle, urolithin A.
But urolithin A is the main one.
It's the predominant and most biologically active final metabolite. And what's fascinating is that the urolithins are then more effective than their parents. They are significantly more lipophilic and substantially more bioavailable.
So they're easily absorbed and circulate systemically, which gives that prolonged effect that lasts for days.
Exactly. And they show up in the bloodstream much later than the immediate anthocyanin peak. Urolithins are detected in urine typically 7 to 48 hours post-consumption, and they persist in circulation longer.
So it's not about an antioxidant flash. It's about feeding your gut bacteria to produce a drug-like sustained metabolite.
That's the whole story.
Okay, is there direct human evidence that these urolithins are actually doing the heavy lifting in terms of chronic systemic benefits?
This is the strongest piece of indirect mechanistic evidence we have. Researchers, knowing the variability of the gut, decided to just skip the whole fruit and test the final product.
So human trials with purified urolithin A supplements.
Exactly. At doses typically ranging from 500 to 1,000 milligrams per day, conducted in older and middle-aged adults. And the results were highly promising.
What do they find?
They showed substantial benefits, including improved muscle endurance, some increases in 6-minute walk distance, and critically improved biomarkers of mitochondrial function.
Okay, let's elaborate on that mitochondrial link. Why are urolithins so crucial for mitochondria?
The primary proposed mechanism involves a process called mitophagy. Mitochondria are the powerhouses of your cells, but they degrade over time. Mitophagy is the cell's quality control system. It's the mechanism for clearing out old, damaged mitochondria so they can be recycled and replaced with fresh, high-performing ones.
And urolithin A appears to be a powerful promoter of this mitophagy process.
It does. It's essentially helping clean up cellular junk, allowing the muscles and other tissues to operate more efficiently, which explains the improved muscle endurance.
So this provides incredibly strong mechanistic support that if raspberries successfully generate urolithins in your gut, they could convey these deep systemic effects on cellular health and muscle function.
It does, but, and this is the giant catch, if this entire long-term process is microbiome dependent, not everyone is going to benefit from eating the whole berry.
Right, this is the key limitation. Not everyone has the necessary, specific colon gut microbes, strains like Gordonobacter, are required to perform the efficient conversion.
And researchers have classified people based on their ability to do this, creating different metabotypes.
Right, so people fall into what are called metabotypes. You have people who produce high amounts, but a significant proportion, and the numbers vary widely, from 25 to 80% across different populations, are considered metabolic type 0.
Or UM0. This means they cannot produce urolithins or produce them in negligible amounts.
Which means a substantial chunk of the population could be eating elagitanin-rich foods, raspberries, pomegranates, walnuts, and deriving significantly less systemic benefit from that core molecular pathway.
That's the critical, sobering inference. It tells us that the efficacy of the whole food is contingent upon your internal factors. The trials using purified urolithin A supplements are being studied precisely to bypass this microbiome variability.
So if you're a known UM0, taking a supplement might be the only way to get that mitochondrial benefit.
That the whole fruit cannot provide for you, yes. It puts an entirely new lens on personalized nutrition and the power of the gut microbiome to mediate food efficacy.
Wow. If you don't have the right bacteria, you don't get the deepest health benefits. Simple as that.
It seems so.
Okay, we've covered the short-term metabolic and vascular effects, which have moderate certainty evidence. Now, let's look at the areas where the stakes are higher, but the clinical evidence is much, much thinner. Cancer prevention and cognitive health.
Indeed. The evidence quality here drops significantly, often to low or very low. We're transitioning from functional food applications to specialist, early-phase therapeutic applications.
And this is why the clinical trials in this area almost exclusively use black raspberry freeze-dried powder.
Exactly. They need to deliver a high localized concentration to the target tissue to trigger a therapeutic effect.
Okay, let's start with cancer chemoprevention. What specific localized signals are researchers looking at in humans?
The focus is overwhelmingly on local topical effects at mucosal surfaces, primarily the oral cavity and the rectum. For oral premalignant lesions, changes in tissue that precede full-blown cancer small, early-phase trials use highly specialized topical preparations, gels, lozenges, paste, applied directly to lesion sites several times daily.
And did they see any signs of regression or change in the tissue markers?
Yes. In subsets of patients, these trials reported clinical regression or histologic improvement, and crucially, they measured favorable changes in local molecular markers. Specifically, they saw reduced cellular proliferation.
Meaning the cells stopped growing so aggressively.
Right, and altered markers like COX2 and DNA methylation in the lesion tissue after the treatment. So the berry compounds, when applied directly, appear to interrupt the early high-risk processes.
But these are small early-phase studies.
Absolutely. They provide strong mechanistic data, but they desperately need large-scale replication against hard clinical endpoints, like the actual prevention of cancer incidence over many years. That data is still lacking.
Okay, let's move to the digestive tract. What about colorectal polyps?
This is perhaps the most clinically aggressive trial we have. A phase IB study examined patients with familial adenomatous polyposis, or FAP. FAP is a rare, high-risk genetic condition where patients develop hundreds of colorectal polyps.
A life-threatening, aggressive condition.
Yeah.
So the intervention had to be equally aggressive.
It was. They used a very high dose, 60 grams per day of oral black raspberry powder plus BRB suppositories inserted nightly for 9 months. This is clearly a specialist, clinically supervised regimen.
And the results in this high-risk group.
Clinically relevant. They observed a decreased rectal polyp burden in the patients who were classified as responders, along with favorable molecular changes like modulation of DNA methylation and proliferation markers.
But the crucial caveat for the listener is that these chemopreventive signals are for specialist, clinically supervised interventions, gels, suppositories, high-dose powders, and are not a general recommendation to eat a cup of raspberries to treat or prevent cancer.
Precisely. This is not consumer self-care. It's an intervention used in clinical protocols under strict medical supervision for specific high-risk conditions.
Right. Now let's shift to cognitive function and mental well-being, which often drives superfood purchasing decisions.
The evidence gap here is substantial. The certainty is very low. Direct human RCTs focusing solely on raspberry-specific cognitive benefits are extremely scarce. Most supporting evidence is extrapolated from systematic reviews of mixed berry.
The blueberries, strawberries, all bundled together.
Exactly, which show only modest heterogeneous effects, often on secondary outcomes like executive function rather than hard memory endpoints.
Are there any specific raspberry trials we can point to, even if they're small, that suggest a direction for future research?
There is a small, highly specific pilot RCT. It involved older adults with mild dementia who were also overweight and had a diagnosis of H. pylori infection.
Wait, H. pylori, the stomach bacteria, what does that have to do with mild dementia? That seems like a complete curveball.
It does, but it ties back to the systemic anti-inflammatory story. H. pylori infection causes chronic inflammation in the gut, which can increase systemic inflammation and potentially compromise the gut-brain axis. Researchers hypothesize that the massive anti-inflammatory effects of the black raspberry powder could indirectly reduce systemic inflammation, which in turn might ease neuroinflammation.
A fascinating multifactorial target. And what did this highly specific trial find?
The trial reported a modest improvement in clinical dementia rating scores and observed measurable decreases in inflammation in the H. pylori markers. Furthermore, other similar mixed hairy studies using neuroimaging have shown that polyphenol consumption can lead to increased cerebral perfusion in the hippocampus.
But the limitation is obvious. A small sample size targeting a very unique multifactorial health problem.
Yes. A single, small pilot study with only 21 participants. It generates a signal, but it requires large-scale, robust replication before any reliable recommendation can be made.
And finally, regarding generalized mood or anxiety.
We must be absolutely clear. No strong evidence from dedicated human trials exists to support claims that raspberries directly treat clinical depression or anxiety. Any claims are entirely premature based on the human data.
Okay. So for systemic benefits like cognition, the evidence is highly specialized and very early. For localized therapeutic effects like chemoprevention, the signals are strong, but only when using highly concentrated specialized forms.
That's the takeaway.
Okay, let's transition to the practical takeaways for the listener. The actionable insights derive directly from the successful clinical trial doses.
Right.
Give us the effective doses established in the red raspberry RCTs and the acute metabolic benefits.
For acute metabolic control, which is the most evidence-supported application, the dose is consistently 125 to 250 grams. That's 1 to 2 cups of fresh or frozen red raspberries consumed directly with a high-carb meal.
And for the chronic anti-inflammatory effects, the housekeeping dose.
The chronic trials aiming for that used a slightly higher daily dose, around 250 to 280 grams per day, sustained for 4 to 8 weeks. This is what produced those subtle immune metabolic shifts.
Does the form matter? Fresh, frozen, or dried powder?
Yes, the form matters significantly. Fresh or frozen raspberries are the most evidence-supported forms for the metabolic RCTs because they retain high levels of polyphenols, and critically, they preserve the fiber matrix.
Which is essential for that urolithin gut conversion process.
It is. And freezing them doesn't degrade the benefits, which is great for accessibility. Studies show less than 10% degradation if they are frozen immediately after harvest.
And the freeze-dried powder.
Freeze-dried powder, especially from black raspberries, is used in those clinical settings specifically because it concentrates the bioactives, often tenfold. This is necessary to deliver the high local doses required.
So conversely, what degrades the potency if I try to process them at home?
Heating or heavy processing. If you're juicing, making a jam, or baking above 70 degrees Celsius for more than 10 minutes, you significantly degrade the heat-sensitive anthocyanins. We're talking a 25 to 40% loss.
So whole fruit, fresh or frozen, is superior.
Absolutely. And remember, the food matrix. The benefits were shown when consumed with meals, not as an isolated snack.
Right. And does co-consumption with fat help absorption?
It might. While the urolithin pathway is fiber-dependent, adding them to Greek yogurt or consuming nuts or avocado with the meal may improve the absorption of some anthocyanin metabolites. The fiber, however, is the non-negotiable component.
Let's address the safety profile now.
The general safety profile for whole raspberries is extremely high certainty. They are generally recognized as safe, GRAS, at typical dietary levels, and even at the higher trial doses. No major safety signals were reported.
Any minor gastrointestinal issues?
Very minor. Temporary bloating, nausea, or diarrhea were reported in less than 2% of participants, and usually only at the highest dose. For the vast majority, they are extremely well tolerated.
What about raspberry leaf? You have to touch on that.
Yes. Raspberry leaf is botanically and chemically distinct from the fruit. It's used in herbal preparations, traditionally in pregnancy. However, the human evidence is limited and equivocal. Professional bodies urge caution, and the recommendation is always to discuss it with a maternity care provider first.
And the risk of drug interactions.
No strong, consistent clinical evidence exists that whole raspberries interact with common drugs like warfarin. However, a general caution is sometimes advised when consuming very high doses of extracts alongside anticoagulants, but formal trials are largely lacking.
Finally, we have to talk about the supplement industry's heavy reliance on raspberry ketone.
This is a critical distinction. Isolated raspberry ketone supplements are usually synthetic and are absolutely not equivalent to consuming the whole fruit. Safety data for the high doses typically sold are sparse. They should be avoided in favor of the whole fruit.
That brings us to the essential reality check. What is not supported by the human clinical evidence we reviewed?
Okay, we must reiterate the critical gaps with very low or no human evidence. Number 1, longevity and lifespan.
No human RCTs.
None. Any claims are purely speculative. Number 2, weight loss.
Meta-analyses show no significant effects on weight, BMI, or waist circumference.
Right. They are healthy, but not a passive weight loss agent. Number 3, cancer prevention treatment from dietary consumption.
Only early-phase biomarker data for localized lesions using high-dose specialized preparations.
And finally, significant changes to fasting metabolic markers in healthy individuals. If you are metabolically healthy, consuming raspberries will likely not significantly shift your fasting glucose, HbA1c, or general lipid panel.
The message is clear. The greatest value is as a highly potent, targeted food component for those with specific metabolic risks.
Exactly.
Okay, let's wrap this up.
To synthesize the evidence, raspberries are an excellent, safe, and nutrient-rich food component supported by moderate certainty evidence for short-term metabolic efficacy in specific high-risk groups. Their value lies not in dramatic, generalized disease reversal, but in targeted, modest support.
They are a tool for precision metabolic housekeeping and minimizing the daily stress on your body.
Exactly. So a final actionable summary. If you are managing post-meal glucose or insulin resistance, add approximately 125 to 250 grams, 1 to 2 cups of fresh or frozen red raspberries directly to your starchy meals. The evidence strongly supports this.
And for cardiovascular support.
For cardiovascular support and chronic anti-inflammatory effects, sustained daily intake of 1.5 to 2 cups may offer modest vascular and endothelial benefits over several weeks, with the black raspberry variety or its extracts showing more potent signals.
And the niche therapeutic uses.
That evidence is for black raspberry powders used in specialist clinical protocols, not self-treatment.
This entire deep dive leads us back to the most fascinating biological puzzle and our final provocative thought for you. The profound role of the gut.
The strongest potential systemic benefits associated with these foods improve mitochondrial health, potential muscle endurance, are completely dependent on your unique microbiome's ability to produce that highly bioavailable metabolite, urolithin A.
And since the research clearly shows that a massive percentage of the population, anywhere from 25% up to 80%, are non-producers of these crucial urolithins, how much systemic benefit are you actually getting from the elagitannins in your daily diet?
If the deepest, most sustained efficacy of a functional food is contingent on a missing piece of your internal biology, it raises an important question for the future.
Right. If we truly want to understand the nutritional efficacy of our food and stop relying on generalized claims, and we want to avoid wasting time and money on a healthy food our biology can't fully utilize, shouldn't we start testing our own gut to see if we're biologically equipped to process these beneficial compounds?
It does make you wonder.
It makes you wonder if the next great superfood discovery will be made not in a field, but in a test tube, by finding the bacteria we need to unlock the food we already eat.
A provocative thought indeed. Understanding your internal factory is the next frontier.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating clinical facts behind the humble raspberry. We'll see you next time.